See if you can guess what this is.
Pull your pants back up.
So childish. So you got a new toy. How's your printer working out? Your new resin printer?
Oh, it's sweet. It's so nice that I'm astonished by the quality of the resolution. It's making such little pieces. The resolution and the detail, is crazy.
And it has some kind of exposure thing so that it's quicker to do each layer.
Yeah, you can.
Is that with the 4K?
Yeah, you can adjust it to do exposures. Short exposures, long exposures. You can do all that in the slicing software.
But I didn't know if your printer had a different kind of light that it could afford to do in 2 seconds what mine does in 8 seconds or something. Do you know what I mean? Because you were saying
maybe it's an LED light. It's LED, so it's a DLP printer and works pretty well. I mean, I've actually been for post curing, instead of having a UV chamber, which is another $400 or $500 to have something like that. I've got one of these handheld. It's a pretty high power UVC lamp for disinfecting stuff that I have. I've just been post curing it by shining my UVC light on it, and it sets that stuff up in seconds.
Oh, you should stick it in a box with some tin foil or something and just let it do its thing.
Yeah, it just boom. It's cured.
Well, that's neat. So you mentioned before, because it's not something I've ever done, but you mentioned before that you can get inhibition issues with the resin if you're molding in platinum silicons with that stuff.
Yeah, I've had some minor issues. I haven't tried anything yet with the resin stuff, but with the PLA, I've noticed some mild inhibition, but it's nothing that a nice spritz with Inhibit X will take care of.
Oh, okay. I was wondered if you used, because I know you could spray something with lacquer, but obviously if you've got very, very tight detail, you don't want to be filling the details with any kind of sealer or anything.
And you can force cure the silicone with the Inhibit X real easily.
Oh, okay. Because I understood it. Obviously, I've used it before, like on a surface that I suspect or know to be dodgy, like a fresh fiberglass mold, for example.
Right.
I will use Inhibit X on it when I'm about to pour up my platinum silicones, and then it almost never goes, never retards afterwards, and that's great. Yeah. There's no inhibition in that.
I've done it in molds that I've run foam latex in.
And
it still worked. Yeah.
That's how good Inhibit X is.
Yeah.
That's impressive. You can't really test. That's a pretty severe test.
Yeah, it is.
Because I wondered, because we obviously, it's interesting. Like for me, the whole 3D printing thing is good, but I'm looking to make things in other materials that are much more durable. And so the idea of molding prints is pretty entry level kind of thinking for me, because like you and I, we would have sculpted something and then mold it. So to have a printer print something is a joy. And then you just, you may need to mold it in something. And I thought it might be quite nice to talk a little bit about the molding of prints and stuff. It's not something I've done a huge amount of with platinum silicons though. And that's why I'm a bit dubious. I might have to try some with my prints, because I'm molding something at the moment, and I sprayed it with filler primer because I wanted a smooth finish, and I sanded it and sprayed it, so it's kind of protected from the actual resin itself.
Well, I've done it with some of the little tool holders that I've printed. I'll go into Fusion 360 and all for little dram cup holders or brush holders that I'm going to then mold in silicone and cast out in resin or in silicone. That's where I've experienced the slight inhibition problems, but the Polymaker Polymax PLA, I don't seem to have any problems with that stuff, and that filament's the shit. I absolutely love the Polymaker Polymax.
I got some Polymax, and it's very exciting. I also started drooling at some direct drive filament feeds that you can put at the hot end. I'm like, oh, I can't afford to keep doing this, but it's just like, oh my god, these things are amazing. Anyway,
Yeah,
we're slowly drifting into a bloody 3D printing podcast, which I don't want to do. But yeah, it's just not something I've really considered. But it'd be quite nice to do an article about that, maybe for the prosthetics magazine, or a little bit, or something about molding
sure.
3D prints and stuff. But yeah. And also acrylic polymer and molds. There was an interesting question on the 911 where someone was asking about running foam latex in some acrylic one molds. And acrylic one is kind of similar to jesmonite. It's a acrylic polymer that you mix with a stone, and then it gives you a nice kind of
Oh,
high grade thing.
like the Forton MG.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
And they all sort of belong to that kind of like much safer material. I think colleges would like them because there's no fumes and all that kind of stuff. You could wash the brushes out in water, so it's just much nicer to use. I don't know if you've ever run foam in a 4-ton mold to
I
see.
have not, but I don't see why it wouldn't work. If you can run it in fiberglass and epoxy molds, you should be able
Mhm.
to do it in a Forton mold or the one that you mentioned.
Mm,
It just makes sense. One of the things about the Forton is you've got to be pretty precise with your mixtures because you have so many different components you have to mix together.
all right.
It's it's
It's
a
not something I've done.
it's a little bit of a pain.
Okay, because
Uh,
the standard jesmonite, I think, is 2.5 parts powder to 1 part water, and I think acrylic one is 2 to 1.
I think
Um,
Forton's got three components. It's got the stone,
okay,
then a liquid, a liquid polymer, and then a powder that you have to mix in with it.
right.
And I've gone to Home Depot and because they have this acrylic fortifier stuff that you can buy. It's over where you buy cement and concrete,
Right.
and you can just mix mix that in. If you're doing 50-50 water in this acrylic fortifier, you can just
Mm.
mix that in with your stone, and then you're going to get a stronger stone once it's cured. And especially if you lay plastic over it before it sets up, so that as it heats up, it traps the moisture in there. It's going to just make it.
Yes.
It's going to make it much stronger.
Now I'm trying to think what it was. There was an old Fangoria magazine. I've still got it somewhere, and they had a Acryl 60. That was it, a tin of
Mhm.
Acryl 60, and they
Yeah,
mentioned
this
this
acrylic
then.
fortifiers. It's the same stuff.
So it sounds like a very, very similar thing. And I did find an article. There was a guy that had done some comparison tests, and he'd found some kind of it was an acrylic compound that he got from somewhere, and it was like the cheapest. He did like a sample set with different things, and he found this to be very similar. But it's interesting when you start making molds that you're going to bake, then the molds have to perform. Whereas if you're making like a stacked object that you're just putting on the wall or something, it's not really a big deal. But something that actually has to go into an oven, and then you've got to stress the mold to open it, or you may have to bolt it. Obviously, then suddenly these higher grade materials that might cost more, you kind of go, well, they're still less expensive than epoxy resins
Right.
or and less smelly than fiberglass. So it might be worth paying a little bit extra to have, you don't burn through gloves and you don't need masks and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know if that would work out well, but it was an interesting point. And I mentioned that we'd run foam in them years ago at Neil's at Millennium, years and years ago, probably about 20 years ago. And I remember we ran foam in it, but I wasn't very impressed with it, partly because you couldn't see through it. And
Mhm.
I was so used to using translucent fiberglass, where you could see through it. Looking back, I don't really think that's a big deal because now I use so many epoxy resin molds, that doesn't worry me anyway. But also, I'd noticed that the edges had crumbled, the cutting edge had been crushed down. But I think a lot of that's to do with the way we made the molds. And it may be that because we were using a new material, we just mixed it incorrectly. I completely accept user
Could
error
be.
in this point. But it might also be that I think we may have been baking them too hot. But also because they were thin molds
That
and
was
we were
probably back in the days when 185 degrees Fahrenheit was the standard, and now
right.
I and yeah, because then you don't have to keep it in the oven quite as long, but you've got a much narrower window for completely fucking the foam up
Yeah, maybe.
at a
It
higher
could well be.
temperature.
Well, we did Celsius, it would have been 100, which I think is the top end that you would bake foam at anyway. So I'd be tempted to just lower the oven temperature, even till maybe 75, 80, whatever that would
Yeah.
be in Fahrenheit. But so it would take longer, but it's less of a, a stress on the
In
mold.
a way,
But also,
if you're not in a hurry with foam latex, as long as it gels, it'll eventually cure on its own. You don't have to heat
yeah,
it
true.
up. It'll cure at room temperature.
Yeah.
If you're willing to wait for a month or so.
Well, they're actually filming next week,
Yeah.
so
But
but yeah.
I cured. I was doing a class at the engineer guy in Atlanta a few years ago, and I actually cooked a foam latex mold in the back of a pickup truck in the parking lot.
I bet that was smelled nice. Was it
In a nice Georgia summer.
Nice. Yeah, well, that would work.
Wow.
Certainly saves on
Foam
electricity
turned
bills.
out great. It was nice and
Mhm.
soft.
Well, there you go. It'll work. So yeah, I guess if we'd had it on a lower temperature, but also we'd made our molds in such a way where we were replicating the same thing we do with fiberglass. So using it as a straight fiberglass substitute. So it was laminated in 2 or 3 layers of glass. So I suspect the molds probably weren't strong enough. I'd probably do them more like a kind of a block mold.
Mhm.
Where they were much, much thicker with extra layers of glass, and maybe strap them together rather than bolt them, because I think the bolts probably put a lot of stress on very individual spots. So it
Yeah.
could be the way that I'd used it that made it fail rather than it was the fault of the material. It was probably more my fault, but it'd be quite nice to try that again. But I'd like to do a test with some silicone pieces. I might do that on the next makeup plan I've got. I love epoxy so much, but I want to try and start using more humane materials, especially when we do like college demos and things, because then they can
Right.
get into the habit of doing the same processes, but A, the materials are much safer, but B, also they're a lot less expensive as well, especially if you're only doing 1 or 2 runs for an assessment or something. You don't need to
Well,
make something that's going to last forever.
Rob Freitas posted on Instagram yesterday. It was a big picture of a bowl of potter's plaster with the dry lake bed effect in it. So he was
I saw that picture. Yeah.
letting the water all soak in, and
Yeah. Yeah.
pottery plaster's been around for many, many years,
Mhm.
and sometimes the old ways are the best way. Sometimes there's
Yeah, no, I saw that picture.
nothing wrong with making big molds out of stone.
No,
It'll
if it
work,
works, it works.
and it's
And
certainly a whole lot less expensive.
yeah, and it's a shame if the first mold you ever make is with epoxy, because you really kind of jumping the gun, really, aren't you? Missing out on a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah, you need to learn all the ways, because there's no one set way to do anything. As we've talked about, there's a half dozen ways to do everything.
Mhm.
At
And it's
least.
combining those things as well, like you were saying about before about using an epoxy gel coat and then backing it up with a hard plaster.
Yeah.
And that's a great idea, because then it's the best of both worlds. And I was wondering if I could do that with Jesmonite. I could get like the release qualities of the surface of an epoxy gel coat
I
and then
bet you
back it
could.
up with Jesmonite, or the if there are any thick deep areas. Although Jesmonite's pretty good, but it's quite heavy by comparison. So you could maybe do some deep areas with the freeform air, and then once you've kind of made a smoother surface, you could then go in with the Jesmonite, because the Jesmonite has a kind of I think they call it quad axial glass. It's like big gaps in the
Yeah.
glass, and it lays down nice, like the mesh you get for epoxy resin.
Yeah, and
So
if you're in doubt about whether the Jesmonite's going to bond to the epoxy or not, you could always lay in some rough chopped glass or some burlap or some kind of fibers into the top layer of the gel coat before it's completely set up, without damaging the surface area, to give the stone something to grab onto.
Yeah, so you got a nice mechanical.
For extra hold. Nice
Yeah,
mechanical bond.
oh, that's good. Because the thing about Jesmonite as well, which I like, you have a couple of additives you can add. You can add a retarder to it. You can add a thickener, which is quite nice, because its natural state is quite fluid, so it's quite nice for pores and things as well. But if it's too thick, you do get air bubbles. So doing like block casts and stuff is a bit rough. But again, I guess you just do the gel coat with a brush like you would epoxy, because that way you can, make sure you touch down the surface. But it's lovely that you can wash your brushes in water.
Well, the same company that makes the acrylic fortifier that I haven't bought it for a while, but that I get at Home Depot, there's also a glue that you can get, so you can mix that in with the water, and that will help ensure that if you're adding to a stone, on new stone onto something that's been cured for a while,
Mhm.
that the glue will help make sure that it doesn't delaminate.
Oh, amazing. And then, yeah, and if that's got in it, if that then gets chipped because that's already in the plaster, then it will be much more responsive at holding on to repairs and stuff. Like if you got clamps or something that broke an
Yeah.
edge. Interesting. Well, that's cool.
Yeah.
And one other thing I noticed on the forum today, someone mentioned Super Baldies in a spray can. Now, Super
I
Baldies
haven't
is a
tried it.
unique animal. Well, I mean, I think the spray cans, in all fairness, I think it was just they tried something out and I don't think it worked, but there's still lots of cans out there. So, I mean, it does work in the sense that stuff does come out the nozzle, but nothing like as good as it does with an airbrush. And you
Right.
can't clean it out like you can clean an airbrush. I think the nozzle gets blocked. I don't know if you've seen any of that, but it just comes out like silly string sometimes.
Well, the nozzle on my 3M77 spray adhesive that I like to use inside my epoxy molds when I'm running foam latex. I'll just do a light dusting of the 77 to make sure that there's no skin pull away during the baking process.
Right.
And there's no residue, and that glue just kind of bakes away.
Right.
But
Yeah, I've used that.
those nozzles will get clogged up, and I'll just get, yeah, like you said, it's like a silly string. I'll go to spray it, and this is boom, stream.
Yep.
It's a Spider-Man thing,
Yeah.
right into the mold. It's like, fuck.
So I guess you just got to remember, if you do use anything like that, to spray it into a paper towel or something, or a bin or something first, just to check it is coming out, rather than find out all too late that it just shoots a big pool of it. Because obviously the dream is that you spray a fine mist.
Yeah.
And you mentioned ages ago about the Preval sprayers, the Preval sprayers.
Yeah, those work.
Preval, and they
Wow.
you combine them as a container and replacement gas cans, and it basically turns any liquid into an aerosol spray, which is really handy, and that's probably the best way to go. We do have them here, but they're not as popular. They don't seem to be. I mean, you can find them, but you have to dig around to find them. They're not as common.
They work really well.
They do work really well, but I still think they do work well, actually. But compared to the spray can, I think you get such a much better result with, just a spray can. Sorry, a much better result with an airbrush.
Yeah.
Because you can clean the airbrush, you can adjust it, and also that's what an airbrush is designed for. It's designed to spray things specifically, whereas the can will kind of work. But the trouble is, the thing that comes through the nozzle is something that dries and evaporates and clogs it in a way that most things in a can don't. So yeah, it's not ideal. You'd think like spray cans work all the time, so it should be fine, but not the case with this stuff. Anyway, so there we go. So that's my tuppence on that. Our guest this time is Brian Kinney.
Such a nice guy.
It's a really nice chat, and I feel terrible about this because we recorded it over a year ago, and it's just one of those things that I kind of forgot about and had other things come in, and this last year's been quite busy, so there's been quite a few distractions. But I did apologize profusely. It wasn't we recorded it and I hated it, and that's why I didn't release it. It was just other things got in, and we did other things.
Oh, it's really good. I listened to it yesterday, and upon listening to it, I realized I really know very little.
I kind of felt a little bit like that after I listened to it, because it's one of those things when I hadn't listened to it at all since we recorded it, and listening back to it, I was like, this is a really good chat. I had a great time listening to it, and then it was a joy to edit. It was very little editing to do, mostly sound,
very
checking, recording and stuff. But
I love listening to our own podcasts and learning lots of things.
Well, that is one of the selfish reasons I thought podcast is nice, because you get to speak to people about stuff. You can tax them about things and find out, get free information. But no,
Brian is a wealth of knowledge. My God.
Yeah. So interesting, and he has a nice angle that he's from the States and has lived there, but also lives over here, and so he has a nice English and American kind of take on things, which is quite lovely, which is why I like these conversations that we have, where we'll compare things and you'll mention things that I don't have here, or and you can kind of see, oh, okay, this is what we would call that here something else, and then you can kind of drill down and find out what these things are called. But yeah, this is a good example of the one of those chats which is like a joy to do, and hopefully will be interesting to you guys too. So I guess we'll put that on now. You can listen to
the one and only Brian Kinney.
I don't think I was here at the time, but it was to go to his house. I don't know if you ever got to see it, but he literally had a labyrinth of garden sheds.
It was like Isha, somewhere in Isha.
It was in Isha, yeah. But he had Christopher Reeve's wigs and Ewoks and the singing horse from Top Secret, and all these things were just in the sheds. And, I was so inspired by that. Like, here's his nice house, we're having tea, and then let's step into the garden. Here's film history. Here's Chewbacca teeth and Yoda's cane, and my mind is blown.
Yeah.
I never in a million years imagined one day I'd live 13 miles away from him and have sheds in the garden with all my
that's kind of what I did stuff. That's what
So and then you're a stone's throw from there. So here we are, and outside London in the country, and carrying on the Freeborn legacy. That sort of mentality here. I love that.
It's kind of weird, isn't it? Because I think the thing is over here particularly as well. You got space has always been at a premium. I mean, it costs a lot because there isn't much of it. Like in the States, you have not so much now, but you have like those big workshop areas because you can afford to build outwards because there's the space to do so. Depends where you are, obviously. But here, there isn't really anywhere like that. So you get a lot more of these little pockets of things, and you'll see like, people being tailors in their house or whatever, and all these little cottage industries, and it's quite nice. And it's weird to think that stuff would happen here, but it does.
In the States, you'd have it's all about the garage. What's a guy doing in the garage? You're building a car or a rocket or something. And here it's all about the sheds. So I didn't really understand the shed culture until I moved here. And, who's got the fancier shed and how many sheds can you fit in the garden? And it just takes the place of the garage. But now I get it. Now I'm very happy to have sheds where I go out and the magic happens in there.
Yeah, I think the thing about a shed is it's less of a commitment constructionally, if that's a word, but also you don't really need like planning permission to build it because it's not a permanent structure.
Yeah.
And also, I think depending on where you live, that a lot of houses were built before the car was around, so they didn't incorporate a garage or a drive because no one needed them. So you end up we don't have garages in quite the same way. But yeah, no, it's just the nature of that. The country full of like potting sheds and greenhouses and sheds. It's tragic, but kind of fun.
I love it.
So how you doing, Brian?
Good. Just still recovering from Christmas. I've eaten too much.
Yeah, I know. It's been a few days since Christmas, and it's like the chocolates are still there, and there's, too much stuff.
My wife tried to keep a tally. She said, "How many mince pies have you had this month?" And I really didn't want to answer that. Didn't want to think about it.
I don't know.
It happens.
Too many. So I wanted to chat to you about various effectsy things, and when I messaged you and I spoke to you about what I associate different people with and what they do, and with you, it's largely to do with how I pigeonhole you in my head as a very courteous and polite professional kind of attitude, and I wanted to sort of talk about what happens when a lot of people make stuff themselves and their little workshops, and they make things, and then there's a point at which you start sticking it on, and then you're dealing with another person, and up till that point a lot of it can be just you by yourself sculpting in a head cast or whatever, and then you've got this object you're now putting onto a person, and then it sort of gets delivered into this other environment, and with the set it's kind of like an animal. It's like there's different parts to this animal, and it's a different thing, and I thought it'd be interesting to chat about how it works on set when you're working with something that perhaps you've made, and now you're applying it, and now it kind of takes on a life of its own, and it's like looking after these things and maintaining it and all that kind of stuff. Because I don't think it's something that people necessarily learn about at makeup school, because they learn about the technique of doing it, but then you stick it on an actor who perhaps doesn't like you, or doesn't want to get up at 3 a.m. to put this thing on, or they kind of scratch themselves on the face like this, and then they ruin the piece. You're like, and you got to maintain it. So that would be a good sort of, I think, a subject to talk about, like dealing with stuff on set, managing makeups, looking after them, and trying to be nice the whole way through, because at the same time, you're on show and you want people to be like, to hire you again, because although you may work 15 hours at a stretch.
Very, very true. I think it's something that it definitely takes time to navigate, but I like to think that I figured that out, and I knew I could navigate that world early on, and I knew it's the world I wanted to be in.
Yeah.
Because when I started, I was in doing a lot of workshop stuff, and I'd be in the warehouse where you're not necessarily touching anything living and breathing. You're sculpting, you're molding, you're maybe doing flicks of paint for a day or slush casting latex. And, I think a lot of it comes, you really have to read the room. You're going to encounter different personalities, different conditions. You might have a luxurious 15-station trailer in Hawaii and it's a very comfortable setting, or you might be in a Russian military tent in Iceland, 10 degrees below zero, and the same job has to be done. You have to create this character. You have to see whatever you've made, as you said, come to life, take on a life of its own, going on an actor's face. Mm-hmm. So, it's navigating all these different personalities and knowing the tone. You really have to. I think you have to blend into, you have to become part of the machine that's happening around you.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is, I think, sort of knowing different responsibilities get delegated. For instance, if you come on a lot of shows as a day player, maybe you're not familiar with the system, but the thing is to look around, adapt, be helpful, learn as much as you can about the process that's expected in that environment. And finding your
I think
your
that's the
footing.
thing. It's sort of slotting into that existing machine, isn't it? And I think when you and particularly every production will have its own unique flavor because that particular group of people have been working together. But this is the thing I find quite odd about prosthetics, is that you will, and not necessarily say with straight makeup or day playing, but with prosthetics, I might be on a show for weeks or months. And then I'll go on set, and I've been on the show for some time, but no one's seen me yet, because it was in a workshop in the middle of nowhere. And now we're in this location, and everyone's doing their thing, and they're all strapped up in North Face gear on set, and they're, doing their thing. And you kind of feel like, what you've been doing, and suddenly now these things you've made, you're putting onto somebody, and it fits into this environment, and then you're working with people you've never met before, but they're going to talk to you in a certain way because their job is to do this, and they're directing whatever, and fit it in, and it's quite difficult at first, which is why I think most people don't find themselves in a very senior position when they first start, because you need to be distanced enough from it, don't you, to observe without fucking something up royally, but also close enough to feel the heat so that you do have some responsibilities, and then gradually ease in. But for prosthetics, there's so much that happens before the set thing. That's why I wanted to kind of focus more on that, because most people think about what happens in the workshop, but it's like what happens after that.
Yeah.
Because that's the bit where you could do all this great work and then you completely fuck it up on set by turning up late or smelling bad or not realizing that your actor doesn't like being poked around too much in the face. You know what I mean? And you got to kind of, I need to do this, but at the same time, how can we, work together so that you don't end up hating me because
Yeah. Well, and I think I realized it was of no benefit to just be strictly prosthetic, strictly special effects makeup artist. You really have to learn makeup, understand it all as a craft. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that can be sort of a shock to people. I've known artists in the past, myself when I started, if I walk into a trailer or a makeup room and my fingers are covered in packs and I'm wearing the Black Horror t-shirt and the kit's a mess, that's not going to go over well when somebody sits in my chair. They're thinking, oh, who is this slob that's now going to touch my face? Do they know anything about hygiene and etiquette? And so you have to maintain a certain level. Even though we're still working with glue and paint, it has to be a little more refined once you're in that arena and getting somebody ready for set. Mm-hmm. So I think that just basic packing your kit can be different than what you're used to in the workshop. Yeah, that was I feel like there's a little more crossover when it comes to work in Europe, but in the States at least, it's always been a little more separate, the workshop from the on-set work, mm-hmm. and that's because of the unions. It's changing more and more over time, But I
Really?
feel like there's more of a barrier and more of a transition that happens when you step out of the workshop and into the application and set realm.
Yeah, I think over here, because you don't have that same union thing, it tends to fall a lot on the people that run the shops to know their crew well enough to invite certain people on, or maybe not ask somebody on. Do you know what I mean? Because I've seen that where you kind of go, maybe it's not been addressed, but certain people may be wholly unsuited to being on set. They're great at what they do in the workshop, but they won't go on over well, and there won't necessarily be a discussion about that. It's just you just wouldn't necessarily get asked. So it's quite good to make people aware of that. There isn't a clear-cut designation. But I guess that's like anything, isn't it? It's like finding somebody attractive or getting on well with somebody. You don't say, hey, I'm really handsome and attractive and intelligent, you should hang out with me. It's like, that's not for you to decide. All you can do is try and be the best you can and hope that somebody else picks up on it. Do you know what I mean? You can't leave that.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like that with a lot of work. It's like, I think a lot of it comes from, and this is where I sort of mentioned it from like the makeup schools, there's a lot of things you can learn technically, but it's a case of doing that in the environment where you're working on somebody else, around somebody else, to their schedule, and that's when it becomes different, because it's now you're actually applying what you do in this environment, and it can catch a lot of people. If they've done it once in makeup school, or they've done it a couple of times, they go, well, I can do this, and it's like, yeah, but can you do it at 3 a.m?
Exactly.
And the actors perhaps didn't realize that their character is going to be killed off and they're really pissed off today, and so can you still do that under those conditions?
and that's a huge shock and transition at times as well, because I've seen these incredibly articulate 4 to 7 hour makeups done for a demo or just as a personal project, and maybe there have been test versions first, so by the time it's photographed, it's had all the time and money in the world. Suddenly you're having to do something of that caliber in an hour and a half, if you're lucky, maybe 45 minutes. Mm-hmm. Can you do the efficient version? Can you get it done under the time frame? And that might be one of 4 makeups you have to do that day. And like you said, at freezing conditions at 2 a.m. with a grumpy actor, but the show must go on. Mm-hmm. So can you adapt? Or if maybe you have an hour and a half allocated for a makeup and they're half an hour late, and that makeup still has to be done. They still have to get to set on time.
Yeah.
Can you pick your battles and hustle, get your pieces on, and still get them painted efficiently?
Yeah. And also, if it wasn't your fault, it's tactfully addressing that without saying, well, they were late. You know what I mean? You can't just dump them in it.
You can't, yes.
So it's kind of like sort of schmoozing a little bit with the second AD maybe to try and, massage some time and things.
and showing no fear. The last thing you want to do is be a shaking, sweaty mess in a panic and stressed about it. You just have to take a deep breath and just keep moving forward.
Yeah. And also knowing where you sit in the scheme of things, because obviously if they come to you with makeup first, it may be that they need to shave first, or clean up, or they've got moisturizer on which you need to clean up, and then you do your makeup, and then like you say they turn up late. It's kind of like, well, I know I've got 3 hours, I could probably shave a half hour off, but it's going to be a bit tight. So maybe what I'll do is go speak to costume and let them know that I'm going to be a little bit late, so they've got time to prepare or something. Do you know what I mean? So you thinking ahead of the curve, so that they don't just say, well, they come straight for makeup and they're late. They don't necessarily know the story of why they're late. So it's kind of ultimately the job is they need to be on set on time. What can I do? And I guess if everyone thinks like that, how can we all work together to try and massage these things together? It might be shave 5 minutes off there, or then it all kind of lands as it should, nice and smooth, without it being like, just you doing your thing and not thinking what happens next.
And sometimes it's you might completely unscheduled have to jump in and help somebody else with their makeup. If you see the situation has happened next to you and your makeup's finished, or you have the 5 minutes you were going to use to get coffee, instead you jump in and you get the pieces down without stepping on anyone's toes. Like, you're not necessarily putting your stamp on someone else's makeup, but just the courtesy of, can I pick up a brush and give you a hand, so that the whole thing arrives on schedule. Finding those moments is important too. I think a lot about the Game of Thrones experience, because that was such an eye-opener. And thinking specifically, I felt like the way Barry and Sarah ran their group just set the benchmark for me. I just thought if everything could be this organized and efficient and helpful and no weak links, we'd all be better off. The industry would be better off.
Yeah.
So I felt spoilt on that level. You've been there. You know exactly what that's like.
Yeah, and under under difficult circumstances, and that's where. See, when I first worked with Barry, I was very nervous because he and I started about the same time, and we both started working at the BBC Visual Effects, as it was called then. So I'd known him like since he started. We went to different colleges and everything, but we kind of had like parallel careers that ran in the same, that we'd bump into each other regularly on jobs and things. So when it came to sort of working for him, I was kind of nervous, thinking, how would I feel about this? Like someone that I knew from scratch, you know, was starting out at the same time, and now he's kind of like supervising. Would that feel weird? And it totally didn't. It's like, having seen what he can do and how he does things, I know I can't do those things. So I'm like, but this, you know, the fact that he can means that I get work. And you realize that this is the thing about like supervising jobs, that you need people who are like that, and they don't know they can do it until they're in that position. And it's kind of, wow, that's amazing. And then like on set on Game of Thrones, being Ireland, and it's like, we're in a big marquee, and we had this massive, it was for Hard Home, that episode Hard Home, and it was just like, it's huge amounts of makeup. It must have been about, or at least 3-4 hour makeups, and we were starting at 2 in the morning, 2:30, something like that. And it was phenomenal. And he organised everything and made sure everyone knew what they were doing, and we set up the day before, and very regimented, not fierce, not angry, not you know, a desperately angry person venting and everyone was scared. Everyone did what their best because they wanted to make it work, because they liked the guy. And it was like, and he was working harder than anybody. And you kind of go, that's how you fucking run a shop. That's how you do it. That's how you organise stuff. Be better than everybody else. But at the same time, you put better people in place and you let them get on with it, and you trust them. And then, you know, sure, if somebody screws up, you come down on them. But the fact that you were given the chance meant that people didn't. They just were desperate to do the best they could. And it was like, I'm the same. I'm like, I don't think I'm ever going to be in that position. But you kind of go, fuck, that's how you do it. And then when you work someone that's not like that, you kind of go, oh my God, you have no idea how far short you are falling of what is possible, you know?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was the same thing. I mean, I was there for, we called it the Frozen Lake sequence, but this was the end of not the forthcoming season, but the one before that. And again, it's 2 in the morning, Belfast, marquee, probably 50 artists, and I realized these are artists from at least 10 different countries, and I'm the only American in the marquee. I know that I'm meant to be there, but I'm just wide-eyed, learning as much as I can from the other artists and just getting on with people. And I just thought, this is such a unique dynamic. This doesn't happen. This isn't normal. I wish this was normal, but there'll never be anything quite like this again.
Yeah, it was a special place.
And I don't mean to embarrass him, but I'll mention what a real turning point for me. It might have been my first or second day. At one point, Pat Fode was there, amazing artist, and we'd only met shortly before that. But at one point, he came up to me and he said, "Brian, have you tried these Japanese calligraphy squirrel tail brushes? They hold a lot of product. You can get a really nice line. Here, have this one." And I think I started tearing up because he not only shared a technique with the new guy, but he gave me the brush. And I think I was expecting a little bit more of like the Old West, like everybody, you know, a bunch of outlaws. And, yeah, everybody's kind of don't watch me do this magic trick. You're going to steal my method. And it was completely the opposite. It felt a little bit. I'm sure Pat wouldn't remember it the same way, but for me, it felt like a bit of an initiation, like welcome to the gang. Yeah. And I still have that brush and I still carry that with me. That still moment. Works. Yeah.
That's brilliant. But that's the thing. It's just like, you know, that you have that experience and you kind of go, God, that's how it should be. And it isn't always, but it's you know, it's the way to do things, and it makes you realize just how good it can be. But you know,
well, you could be the best sculptor, the best painter, top artist, but you have to be able to fit in that room, and not everyone can. And I remember Barry said to me, I'd worked on my first job ever was Band of Brothers. I worked with Duncan Jarman, and Duncan and I had kind of gotten back in touch, and he was instrumental when I came back to the UK, in getting me involved. And at one point, Barry said to me, towards the end of that season, he said he gets 200 CVs a day, and you know he doesn't have time to address all of them. But Duncan vouched for me, and he said, "You're here because you know Duncan spoke highly of you," and he said, "You don't have an ego and you're not a dick." That was it. That's what it took to be in that room. That means a lot. So, you know, I I took that as a compliment, and sometimes that's what it is. Just keep your ego in check. Don't be a dick, and you'll be amazed at how far you can get in this industry, how connected and how much you'll enjoy it.
It's interesting because you sometimes get that with, not always, but like a lot of people will say like, oh, do you find actors that are, who's the most annoying actor you work with or something? And you kind of go, well, weirdly, I find the professional actors who are jobbing actors aren't dicks typically. It tends to be supporting artists who it's their first gig and they think, or the second, and they think that the way to get on is to sort of appear like they have this very high standards and that everything around them isn't meeting that standard. And it's like, no, because if you start out as a dick on day one, you don't have a day two, because no one's looking for a fucking project. Do you know what I mean? With regards to anybody. So they want to have an easy time. And if you get on, you're pleasant to work and you can do your fantastic work. You still have to be good, but you have to do it with a smile on your face under those conditions. That goes a long way. And it's like, that's really cool. And Duncan's a great guy and he knows a thing or two about a thing or two. So
he really does. I learned so much from him.
Yeah.
He's just a lovely guy. So I really cherish getting to work with him.
Yeah. I think that's the amazing thing is when you do work on projects, it's, a lot of people think of like the kudos of the project itself, but it's also getting to work and mix with other people and they influence how you do things because you see things being done the way that you don't do. And like you say, 9 times out of 10, actually most people will be quite happy to show you and you go, oh Christ, I never thought about that. And suddenly it affects how you work and you get better being around it because it rubs off on you. And
absolutely.
And then you feel, keenly aware of like you want to do that for other people when you see someone struggling. And it's a lovely thing. It should be like that. I know it isn't always, but it's a lovely feeling when it happens. And, it's being on set, the rules suddenly change because then you're now in their world. It's the big world where all this, there's a lot of things happen, I guess, because of like time constraints. We have to get this many shots done. We've only got this location for some amount of time. We've hired very expensive lights and equipment and cameras and lenses, and they have to happen in this time. And that's the drum that everyone's dancing to, and you have to be able to slot into that. And it becomes a different thing when suddenly, you've got a director screaming at you and it's like, get it done.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, you just have to adapt.
Yeah.
For some of the throne shoots, obviously, it's all about the night. So you're needing to capture as much of the daylight or the opposite, depending on the scene, as you can. And you're just up against it.
I was talking a little bit about you, obviously coming from the States. So you're in the 706, which is the union over there.
Yes, local 706 Hollywood Makeup Artists and Hairstylists Guild. So
can we talk a little bit about what that means? Because obviously this podcast will get listened to in all different places, but in England particularly, we don't really have that kind of thing. But obviously to do that, you have to become somebody that knows a lot of different things, but that feeds into what you're doing. So when you're training and learning your stuff, you learn some hair work presumably and some straight makeup, so all those kinds of different things. And we talk a little bit about what you learned and how it means you can do other things, not just prosthetics, and how that works together, I think, to make a character, because a lot of people get very bogged down in just the prosthetic-y stuff, and there's more to a complete character than just the rubber that they're wearing on their nose, and how you can fuck up something or improve something by doing things other than the rubber.
Yeah, well, I'll go back a bit. I know I've met some wonderful sculptors that haven't necessarily sculpted anything. They've done art pieces, but they haven't done anything that's meant to be a prosthetic. So having some knowledge of makeup, I think, is great for a sculptor, so they know this can only be a certain thickness or a certain dimension in order to fit a face, in order to be transferred from a block of clay to something that'll be worn to create the character. And I think the same goes for. I think it's good to have a basic understanding of cosmetics. If you're a prosthetic artist, understand just a basic makeup, and most of the artists I know have. But in LA, you start off, once you're in the union, depending on whether you choose makeup or hair, they're very separate. You have to decide which category you want to work towards. Once you're in the union, you start off as a trainee. And eventually, after taking a certain number of courses, you can elevate to a journeyman. But what's expected of a journeyman makeup artist is, hygiene, straight makeup, beauty makeup, prosthetic makeups, basic special effects, men's grooming. It's really sort of the full spectrum. Obviously, you'll have areas that you gravitate towards, an area you're more comfortable with. You know, certain artists get booked for their fantastic prosthetic paint jobs, etc. But having to be a journeyman, you really have to have a basic mastering of all the skills. Be good with your hand-laid beards, be good with your bald caps, good with your prosthetic application, and good with a basic beauty makeup.
I think all those things were playing because then you're far more versatile. You know, you could be employed to do a makeup, and then we don't have to get a separate hair person in because you can do the hair. You know, and that's a good asset to have. And I think that's something a lot of people probably miss when they sort of cherry pick what they think they need to know in order to get on. And you may know, like you say, very good about noses and be terrified of hair, and that's fine. But you have to understand that if there's someone who's applying for the job who can also dress wigs and sculpt just as well as you, they're probably going to get the job because, especially when things get quiet, you know, there are a lot of people I know that do like theatre wigs and stuff, and that might tide them over until, you know, other things pick up or whatever. But it's just incredibly versatile. Or you're doing like a werewolf or something, you know, it's like, you know, that's as much hair as anything else. So it's like,
so you want to be good with your Marcel irons in your oven, and you know some of the old school techniques. I mean, just because we have changes in the products doesn't mean any technique becomes completely obsolete. So I mean, I know plenty of people they can do a good lace beard, but when was the last time you hand laid one? You know, on background, when you can't necessarily afford lace pieces for every cowboy, you got to get in there and do a decent beard by hand.
Yeah, and also when you see it done, it's like, oh my god, that's just gorgeous. Or bringing sideburns down to kind of cover an edge or some, you know, just from purely practical utilitarian purpose, you know, being able to do all those things and bring them in because you know how to do them is a good thing to do.
Yeah, you never know when you know, having those skills in your bank of knowledge, when that's going to pop up.
I mean, I think the other thing about prosthetics as well, I mean, if you're dealing with like a character makeup that involves prosthetics, obviously the whole point of a prosthetic really is to not look like it's a piece of rubber. It's got to look like skin. So obviously knowing how skin looks and how it fits in with everything else is also a thing. And when we did a blog post a little bit about it, but like different things to do with silicone, that's not just the sculpting and the texture, there's also the translucency and the finish and the sheen and all that kind of stuff. And those are kind of difficult to quantify qualities that a skin has. But again, if you're used to working with skin, they're things you can bring across. So I guess they're kind of transferable. So if you don't have that training, even though they're not prosthetic skills, they can have a massive influence how well you could do rubber stuff. So that's good to be able to do that.
No, absolutely. You know, I mean, I feel like my favorite makeups I've done are makeups where you can't tell there's any makeup involved. You know, you want it to be seamless and invisible. You want it to disappear. I mean, I would say whatever I'm doing, unless it's an alien or some fantastic fantasy creature, you want it to look like it's in the skin, not on the skin. And that comes from knowledge of painting and layering.
Can you think of any significant events in your life with regards to makeup where you had like massive shifts, like you did something where you go, holy shit, I get this now? Or I'll give you an example. For me, when I was at college, we did, in my second year, I think it was, or the third year, we had to sculpt a full-size human figure. So we had a model come in and we sculpted, and we had to make the armature. We had to weld the armature up, and obviously you find that the arm isn't in the right place. You had to change all that stuff. And then we sculpted the whole thing in wet clay and then made big plaster molds. And I remember sculpting, and there was a point where I was sculpting the fingers and the skin around the nail. And there was like a moment where I could feel something in my brain shift, where I was like, oh, I get it, because the skin's got around the nail, which goes underneath. And I started doing all the nail, and I did them quickly than the first one because it sort of clicked. And from that point on, whenever I'm sculpting things, it's like, oh, I know where to go. I don't necessarily know what it looks like, but I know where to go to find the things I need because I know where I'm supposed to look. So it's something like that. So have you had any kind of experiences where you go, oh shit, having done that, I now get this. And even though it doesn't mean I know all the answers, I know where I should be looking to find them, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh God, I'm trying to think of concrete examples.
Sorry, that's putting you on the spot, isn't it?
No. I'm trying. I'd almost have to look at pictures of makeups I've done, and then suddenly say, "Oh, that was that." But I'm well aware of having those shifts, having those moments, having a job where maybe I apply makeup 3 times, and on the 3rd time I'm like, I should have been doing this all along. And then the next job, when I'm doing a similar makeup, it's changed everything, and I'm doing this method. So it's almost like I can feel myself evolving. I'm trying to think of concrete examples. I mean, I definitely remember where I got to a point where I think it was once I started doing pro bondo transfers and the acetate transfers. I wanted to keep makeups as thin as possible. I was aware of over sculpting something and making something unnecessarily unwieldy on a face. So suddenly everything I did, I wanted to be as paper thin as possible, only embellishing as much detail as absolutely needed. That was a shift where suddenly I felt like I'm using 1/3 as much clay as I used to for the same type of makeup.
But it still gives you the change. It's weird, isn't it? Because you do see that a lot with people who are starting out. They tend to make things far too thick.
Because I know, when I see sort of a student portfolio, here's my final advanced prosthetic project. A lot of times the head is massive. There's almost a marshmallow effect that happens. Like, well, I'm doing something in foam, so I'm going to use a lot of foam, and suddenly you have a piece that's an inch thick all around, and it for what it is, it doesn't have to be that thick. Yeah. So I think maybe there's some fear in a less is more approach to it. Can I go this thin and still make it as theatrical, as fantastical as I want it to be?
Yeah, I think that is probably a product of, like, particularly with makeup schools, if you don't get a lot of access to a foam oven or a mixer or whatever, when you get your one opportunity to do it, you're gonna go, I'm really gonna, and it's like drinking for the first time. You just drink like a big bottle of something that's really not advisable, and then over time you develop a taste for single malts, but you don't come out the womb like that. You have to kind of pile it on heavy. So I think it's about repetition, isn't it? And I think that's a good thing about small makeups, is you can do small pieces yourself for not a lot of money. And that doesn't mean it's a lesser thing. It's more a case of, but is it effective change and it looks good? Then that's the thing. It's not about how much, rubber you can pile on someone's face, because I guess the other thing is people want to inflict themselves on something. They want all of that to be them and their work, so they put as much of it as they can on. And actually, like you say, after you've done it, you kind of go, it's too much, isn't it?
Well, I think there's a fine line between, something that's obviously a makeup done for a makeup demonstration and a character. And I always want to get to that point where I can suspend disbelief, and for a second, this isn't makeup. I'm not looking at, that Skin Illustrator and Telesis and this. I'm looking at, wow, that's a ghost, that's an alien, that's something. Yeah.
That comes down to a real mastery of the material, I think, where you don't, none of your brain is thinking how to do it. You're just thinking about the finished thing. And you look at something like Duncan Jarman makeup or a Marc Coulier makeup or something like that, you go, oh fuck, then that none of the process was taxing for them, really. It was all about character, making it look right, but at no point were they thinking, how do I sculpt, how do I make molds, how do I do this? It's like, it's just about making the character tight and correct and finished.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Have you seen some of those Suspiria makeups? They look.
Oh, I saw it when I was in LA. I had nightmares after watching that. But beautiful makeups. I mean, especially the death, the sort of layering, almost like the black parchment.
Yeah.
Pretty fantastic makeups.
We should probably do like a list of makeups that we're referring to, because the other thing I was thinking of was the Charlize Theron makeup from Monster. Again, that was not an overly done makeup. A lot of makeup, but it didn't look like makeup, and I don't even think there were any prosthetics in it. I think it was just teeth and layers of colour and stipple in the wig, and it was just like build up that character. But it's trying to get a lot out of not a lot, if you know what I mean. Like you say, not absolutely. A lot of thickness, particularly I guess with the cameras now. They're so good, they pick up everything. You almost, less is more, but it's harder to do less because it requires a subtlety that takes a lot of practice to get right.
Well, I was lucky. One of my instructors at Delamar Academy was Tom Smith, and he was so sparing with prosthetics, if at all. I mean, maybe the odd eye bag or nasolabial fold and nose, but I mean, Gandhi was all paint. So I was so inspired to see these makeups he'd done, just strictly paint jobs. The same thing with the transformation and Michael Caine's character in Sleuth. I mean, that was always done very theatrically with sort of a pull-off Scooby-Doo mask. And his was all with makeup, old school hair and teeth. And I challenged myself. I mean, I was lucky when I did some of the whites on Game of Thrones. We might have a couple prosthetic pieces, maybe the eye sockets and a nose bridge, but I might try to add a third or fourth piece that was just paint, but that somehow fit the scheme. So basically, two-dimensionally matching the prosthetic pieces on another part of the face. Mm-hmm. So you could look at this makeup and see, okay, how many prosthetics are on there? And you could say, oh, well, 2. Nope, it's 3. You didn't even notice that this was painted rather than sculpted. So if you can seamlessly get there, that's a lot of fun.
It is. It's interesting you mentioned the Tom Smith quote, because I remember, I don't know if you recall when I think it was Temple of Doom came out, and there was a book that came out. It would have come out in all the bookstores, I'm sure, and it was like the making of, and it was just about the behind the scenes stuff. And I remember reading they had like little punch out quotes, and I remember there was one from Tom Smith about makeup, and I remember the quote went something along the lines of one really shouldn't notice the makeup at all. And that was then. I mean, that was, and it's just like, and then at the time I was about 10, 12, I didn't really understand, because all I remember seeing was like the Amish Puri kind of, the big head, the paint job and all that kind of stuff. But of course, there's so much makeup you don't really even notice. You just see someone looking tired or distressed or flustered or worn out, and you don't realize that they're not at all. They're just, that's makeup. It's like, oh my God, it flies under the radar.
It really is.
Yeah.
So, I mean, for every 10 characters he made up, you might only notice that one of them had anything memorable. Mm-hmm. But they're, like you said, it's all made up.
Yeah.
There's nothing on there that's nothing by accident.
And I think that's the magic of makeup, isn't it? Once you can use it, you can start having fun with it and doing all these creative characters. And it's like what a makeup designer will do, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is how can we, read a script and then break it down and, this guy's been up all night, so he needs to look tired. How do we do that? Is it a little bit of red under the eyes, a little bit of sweat, maybe his hair's slightly lank, and you may not even notice that's been done, but it's like, that's makeup,
I mean, some of my favorite makeups are incredibly subtle, and maybe even, cheesy and dated by today's standards. But, I think of iconic images that sort of got burned into my brain, and sometimes it's such a minimal amount. Yeah. To convey a character.
Yeah, but also doing over like a lot of periods. I'm trying to think again like that. A lot of the Raiders movies and stuff where that bit where they're having that big tank chase. Is it Raiders, that one? I think it's in Raiders. The big tank chase, or is it?
The tank was Last Crusade.
Last Crusade at the end. Yeah, I think it was. Yes, it was. And and everyone's covered in dirt from the stuff. And like dirtying down is one of those kind of skills. Yeah. That's someone's come out of an explosion. You don't want it to look like something out of the 70s Two Ronnies kind of sketch. It's got to look like they really have been dirty. And again, if it's done right in the context of the story, you don't notice it, but you notice its absence. Yeah. And it's kind of because of that, it doesn't really get that same recognition, sweat and dirt, without looking too much. Yeah. It's that kind of subtlety. It's quite nice.
The maintaining continuity for any kind of breakdown in dirt. There's an art to that.
Yes, because you got to do that again, but maybe in a week from now.
Yeah. And I've had situations where actors they assume they're helping production. Here, I'm just going to reach down, grab some dirt off the ground, and rub it all over my face. And now they've rubbed my makeup off, rubbed off the expensive fake dirt that's on there, and really gotten nothing more out of it. Maybe they've agitated their skin on top of that. Yeah. You have to tell them, no, just.
It doesn't look...
You're fine. Yeah. Appreciate the effort, but...
Thank you. But, yeah.
Leave it to the pros.
Yeah, because it's that thing of like, just the way things are shot. If they're shot out of sequence, like they're shooting on location, they got mud splat in their face, then they go into a tent, and now 3 weeks later we're in a studio, that mud splat's going to be in the same place. And it mustn't look like it's painted on. So it's like,
I've done that whole bit where you have a grid mapped out and you're matching dot for dot blood spatter that, shooting 2 weeks after the initial head explosion or something. Yeah. So somebody's got blood on their face and it has to match dot for dot.
Yeah. And people go, how is that difficult? It's like, yeah, but when you see a continuity error, especially if it's your error, you're like, oh my God, this thing's 50 foot across the screen, and the blood splat's on the other side of their face now. And it'll live forever on a website of some nerd who's like, no, actually, I was seeing scene 22.
And I've been in situations where I had a designer telling me this one character, it's going to be like a Bond villain and badass, and there's going to be a scar on the eye and this, that, and the other. And it was for television, and it was a driver, like a driver for one of the thugs, whips around the corner in a Jeep. You never see it.
Right.
And I'm thinking, well, we'll go ahead and do that, but you got to know when to bother. That I mean, there's no way you're going to see the character. So
yeah.
Make it a meal when it's there, but not every background can't be a hero.
Yes. Yeah, you just got to blend in.
Yeah.
I've seen that with supporting artists as well. You get like a group of people who are, I'm trying to think, like in The Mummy or Blade 2, where you got like hundreds of extras, and they all want to have a signature move so that they can recognize themselves when the movie comes out, but they're all supposed to be like under this influence of something, so they should behave the same, but they don't want to. And so you end up with 60 people all doing something unique so that they can pick themselves out of the crowd.
Yeah.
It's like, it shouldn't be like that. And you don't want that with the makeup as well. It's like the whole point of what you're doing is to blend into, you've got to slot into the existing package rather than stand out, because
Yeah, no, you're reminding me specifically. I think more than once I've heard about supporting artists being removed in post because, dressed as a zombie, they decided to do the Thriller dance, and
yeah, not good.
They're not the first one that's attempted that, and that instant red flag.
Yeah,
no longer in the picture.
And I guess that temptation is like, oh, it's my one shot, my one time to do this. So it's like, yeah, but they're not gonna stand for that. Have you any idea how much this is costing?
No, especially on a lot of the period epics. I mean, I've worked on stuff where it's got to be 1882 Old West, and you're not allowed to have blue nail polish. Mm-hmm. That's just how it is. Or we're not going to do a shimmery smoky eye. And you do a period authentic makeup, and somebody, a sporting artist, goes to the restroom, does their own makeup, and then they end up on set wearing something contemporary.
Yeah.
And they'll be the first ones removed from set. Red flag, can't have this. You're ruining the authenticity of our project. But again, they want to stand out. They want to be remembered. I'm the girl with the blue nails.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because, if they can have their time again, they'll be like, I get it now. I'm being stupid because this is just about me. And that's kind of what we were saying, like, about the makeup thing, is like, you've got to know how you do your thing, how it fits into this machine. You are a part that's got to slot in, and you can't be the bottleneck that breaks it down, because the machine won't like you. They'll just spit you out and get a replacement. So you have to conform. And it does seem to be an interesting experience the first few times, or if you see someone that hasn't been on set, I guess in a way they go through that kind of like unofficial screening process about I mentioned earlier, about like, I know you probably wouldn't get on, so I'm not going to ask you, or whatever, or maybe stay in the trailer helping out, whatever. But there is that thing of like, there is a certain level where you can go pretty much anywhere in the world, and the crews behave the same way because they're all doing the same kind of work, and they know they have to fit in, and they know they have to have quite a capacity to accommodate other people's ways of doing things and not let them get in the way of it, which is not something that's got anything to do with makeup particularly, and may not even be taught in a makeup school, because those are not rare skills, but for everyone that can put a lipstick on, you show me 10 people that can do a great job, half of them drop out when they get shouted at, another half don't want to do it at 3 a.m, then they've got a stomach ache because they're filming on a location where there are horses inside, and you know what I mean, suddenly you start dwindling down to a unique skill set of being able to do all that shit. And most of it wasn't on the flyer of the makeup school, because that didn't sound particularly appealing. You know what I mean? So it's naturally one of those things I'm imploring, if you intended to work on TV and film, please understand there's more to it than you realize.
Well, that's why, every once in a while I'll teach a course like Script to Screen, where it's basically a week of etiquette, a week of everything that happens between your final project in school and now you're on a film set. Can you make the transition? Do you know how to read a call sheet, budget breakdown, makeup test, continuity, just basic etiquette on set? Do you know not to talk while we're rolling? That sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think sometimes stepping on set can be a rude awakening. You learn some lessons the hard way. One of my favorite experiences this year, I was working on a project and we ended up in a situation where there just weren't enough prosthetic artists available. There were so many projects going on. So I was asked, do I know anyone who would be good? And I was able to find about a dozen former students that really needed some experience and I knew could handle the project, and sort of get them in. And it was sort of like, you've gotten to this point, but this is your final lesson. Here's your station. Here's what we're doing. You have 30 minutes. Then an actor's going to sit in your chair and it's go time. And the next day, one of the supervisors said, "You're your people were really good. They knew what they were doing. And I was so proud. I thought, well, I wouldn't have vouched for them if I didn't think they couldn't handle it. Yeah. But it was just so nice sort of being there to literally oversee and guide these artists that were just starting out on their first real big production set.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, the thing is, you knew them from the course that you taught, and it's quite a delicate area, isn't it? When someone wants to be like, you may get a resume through, or if you need anything, and it's kind of like, I've had resumes from people where I'm going, there's no way. But just courtesy means I can't tell you that. But maybe you need to hear it.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying to you, it's just worth knowing that this is the case. That there are people out there who are qualified.
Yeah. Well,
who are not employable, but they've ticked all the boxes, but they're just not suited to the nature of the work. And that, again, not every makeup school is going to tell you that on day one, because you minimize how many people come through your door, right?
Yeah.
But
and I know plenty of sociopaths that have beautiful CVs. So you really need to be careful. You have to know who you're dealing with. And what I'd want to emphasize to a lot of students is, working instructors we're always looking to see who's got it, even if it's just for our own sake, to know who's going to be able to step onto a set and make it and understand this world. And if I'm in a classroom and I see somebody taking a tea or fag break every 3 minutes and maybe hasn't brought their reference material for their paint job, or just doesn't have a clear vision and doesn't understand how important their time management is, they're not going to impress me. I'm not even going to register. I won't necessarily remember their name a year from then. But if I see somebody really going above and beyond, I mean, an example is a student I had briefly was doing an advanced prosthetic and beautiful alien sculpt. And I looked over to the side and there was a zombie, and I said, "What's this?" "Oh, well, I had some more time to work on a project, so I made another one." So they somehow found the time to make not one, but 2 projects. And then at one point they asked, we were talking about the paint job, and I suggested there was some white incorporated into the paint, and it felt a bit flat to me. So I said, just doing a bit of color breakup, a wash of blue spatter is going to make a world of difference, give you more of the effect you're going for. Half an hour later, I came back and they listened. They not only followed my advice, but could see the benefit of it. So little things like this, I was just making a note. And then when the time came to throw some names in the hat, people we needed, this was one of the first people I called, because I saw they have the discipline. They're not wasting the time. There really is a drive here.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's interesting, isn't it? You see that, especially if you have a class that's reasonably not large, but like you might have sort of 6 or 10. So you've got a group of people, and then you'll say exactly that. You might go, okay, tomorrow we're going to do such and such. So bring in some reference pictures of old age for wrinkling, because we're going to do that. And there'll be 2 or 3 people that didn't do it. They didn't get the reference pictures. And it's no great shakes to go print some off in the office now or whatever, but the fact that it didn't stay with them, and then somebody else sort of brought in a book, and they'll have done like 50 and a bunch of things that they'd had from before, and it's kind of like, that stands out, and when you've got a class of 6 or 10, the fact that most people, if you're going to do a top trumps, of people in that room, you could go through and you kind of go, well, you're the one that was always late and always left early and didn't practice, and you keep adding these things up. They all become like, and then a job comes in, you kind of go, well, the thing is, when you take someone on like you did with those students you took on, you kind of roll in the dice damage that could cause. And if you know for a fact that someone's not pleasant or doesn't turn up on time or doesn't do their thing, you're not gonna ask them.
Yeah.
As cruel as that is, it's true. It's like reputation is going to be built on this. I can't.
Yeah. I mean, if you turn it into a social hour, if it's just a big party, if everyone, just getting on, having a giggle, that can be a detriment too. You really have to know, again, read the room, know the attitude. There's a time to be serious and there's a time to have fun in the pub later, but you have to buckle down. You can't be just having a chat when it's all hands on deck and we've got a deadline.
And there are definitely times, especially on set, where, you've done your makeup and maybe they're not being used for a while or in between takes, and there's a lot of downtime, and maybe, someone, that's the time to be sociable, but you've got to be on point and, start the day right, especially with prosthetics, because, if you don't stick them on right, or there's air pockets or there's wrinkles, you'll be chasing those things all day. And it's like, you got to get it done right at the beginning. And Absolutely. Then kind of half your brain is always watching the rubber all day long from a distance, wait, what they're about to eat, and did I tell them not to eat fried chicken, kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
Have a straw,
But I really think so much of it is also being able to take direction, because you may be a better artist and have a better vision for the way a character should look, but ultimately you're not driving the vehicle. Somebody else is in charge, and you have to be able to follow their vision. Unless you're the designer, it might be a change that you disagree with, but it's not your decision to make.
Yeah.
So that's why every chance I have, I'll make a suggestion, a constructive suggestion to a student when they're doing a makeup, just to see how they handle. I've thrown a curveball your way. I've thrown a change your way. How do you handle this? Are you going to get defensive? Are you going to cry? Are you going to do it without thinking about why? Or are you going to constructively incorporate it?
That'd be a very good thing. That's a brilliant thing to do.
Yeah,
that's very good.
I find that, and it's never in a way that's going to completely change their look, but always something that I found I might be faced with. If I'm on set and I have a designer say, I love that, but can you do some more breakup here? Can you do this? You haven't changed the look completely, but they're getting it more in the direction it needs to go in. So I'll throw those out there. And again, it's just a learning moment. For me, I'm learning how do they handle direction, but also for them, they're seeing, you may think it's 1,000%, there's nothing else that can be changed, but somebody's going to say, but what if this? But what about doing this? Can you go with it?
And I think that'll all come from, doing it a lot, repetition, going through, doing lots of makeups and
absolutely,
which is hard, I think, when you're at college, because you're not on a production and everything you're doing is presumably coming out of your pocket. But it's very important to do things, which is why I still keep coming back to doing small things, but like a nose or eye bags or a mustache or little something, just to make the changes. It's about making the right changes, but you have to completely saturate yourself in it so it back to front, and that's when you start getting good at it, because it becomes less effort to do it, because your hands and your brain just know what to do. Which is
very true.
Repetition, So do something small and do it
very true. Well, and oftentimes I think your first job's on set, you're going to be faced with small character changes. You're not going to get the big, 11-piece overlapping 4.5 hour demon. Those are fun, but you might get the pointed ears, the nose tip, the scar through the eyebrow. How do you handle those?
Yeah. And that's a very good point. I mean, those kinds of things like ear tips, as soon as you elongate an ear, no two ears are perfectly level. You suddenly find that you've added another 3 inches. Now one ear's out here. And it's like, that's got to be tweaked, or the eyebrow. And then you put your piece over the eyebrow. Oh, shit, now I've got to put the hairs back. I don't want to take the whole eyebrow out. I just need to lay on a little bit of hair. And, and you can't use a lace piece for something that small. So you're going to lay hair on, or you can't hair punch it once you've applied it. So,
Absolutely. And one of the things I always tell students is try to think of 5 different ways to do the same makeup. So you might have your favorite paints, but what if those paints don't make it through customs and you're in the middle of nowhere? Can you use these paints? You don't have your Illustrator, but you've got your grease paints. Can you make it work the way they did 30, 40 years ago?
That's a great idea.
And I love those challenges, because I love hearing the stories. I mean, Stuart Freeborn would talk about making the elephant tusks out of styrofoam coffee cups. And Trevor Proud would talk about making the head wound out of jelly donut, and jam on location. I love those MacGyver stories. I think back to being on a set once, and it was a forensic medicine type show, and there was a call for extra dead bodies, just in the background, dead bodies in a corridor, and an artist said, "Well, I can't do those because I didn't bring my airbrush." And I'm thinking, well, get a pancake makeup, get some grease paint, get a bag of flour. It's just death. Get something. But if you get so dependent on the one technique that you like the best, or that you learned on, you're stuck if suddenly that doesn't come with you, if that's not in your kit.
Yeah. I found that way of thinking is probably a bit more common nowadays, partly because of the way products are marketed. Not that there aren't good products, but it's just if you happen to be at a college that has an association with a particular brand, and so they get that particular makeup cheap. You end up using that almost exclusively. You kind of don't realize that there are other ways of doing it, which is why I got very excited when you said, "Oh, try and do the makeup in 5 different ways." It's like, that's a fucking great simple thing like that, but that's a great idea. Like, let's do this.
I love that.
Or break it down. How would you, on paper, how would you approach that in 3 to 4 different ways?
I think initially the reason I started thinking of that with that mentality was because a director asked for something that I wasn't prepared for, and the last thing I'm going to do is say no, because somebody else will say yes. So suddenly I have to do a body paint, and I've only got my tiny little illustrators, maybe a half-ounce bottle of a couple colors, but I've got my grease paint palette here, so I'm going to have to thin this, and I'm going to have to cover more area, and I'm going to make it look like that was my plan all along, and we're going to do this. We're going to get from A to B. No one's going to know. No one's going to smell my fear.
That's great, yeah.
So I just love that challenge. I think so much of it is just kind of thinking outside the box and just going with it. You've got the same time constraint, whether you have the right products, the best products, or not. Mm-hmm. You are still going to get this makeup done. Brilliant piece of advice I once heard from Michael Blake, a retired makeup artist, brilliant makeup artist in America. He told me a story about being asked to do a makeup and thinking, oh shit, I don't know how this is going to happen, and saying, give me 1 minute, I'm going to wash my hands. So you've been asked to do something and you take a moment to wash your hands. It's in that moment you're thinking to yourself, you take a deep breath and you figure out how it's going to get done. Then you step back into position and carry on. But to an outsider, you look like, oh wow, he's going to wash his hands, very hygiene conscious, that's good. And it comes off completely professional, but it's literally taking your oh shit moment and giving yourself a minute to gather your thoughts and then stepping back into it. Mm-hmm. So whatever it takes, if you need that I'm going to wash my hands moment, that'll get you there. It may come immediately, or you may need that deep breath to think about it, but you'll figure it out. And figuring out how the hell is this going to happen, I think those are some of my best memories of this job.
So there we go. That was Brian Kinney. Nice guy, huh?
I hope you guys were taking notes. I have to go back and listen to it again because there's so much stuff in there that I was clueless about.
That's amazing. It was a nice chat, and I'm really sorry that it took so long to get around to get my shit together to actually having that out. But there we go. It's done, and it was an absolute joy, and it hasn't lost anything in its year. It's just weird. We were together in the same room because he'd moved not far from me, and popped over just after Christmas. And it's just so weird to think there was a time where you could have interviews with people face to face. You could go around to people's faces.
I want to get over there when he's there too, because he's turned his garage into a pub.
Yes, I hear. So what you should do is you should come over here. You can stay in the spare room. We've cleared it out now. This is the room I was telling you about with the sofas now, because we moved all the Lego stuff out. That was Jamie's Lego, I hasten to add, not mine. I wouldn't get rid of my Lego. So we've got a nice big spare space up there. So as soon as everyone can come over, you should get your ass over here. And then Brian's like 10 miles away tops, so he's just down the road. So
excellent.
Hey, listen, I watched something really interesting. Over Halloween, I had a big horror book binge. You recall a couple of episodes ago I was talking about horror books, and I was listened to on Audible. I listened to Salem's Lot, which was an amazing book. I haven't read it, but I just didn't have time to read it. I'm reading a few books at the same time, so I'm also listening to books when I go on drives or go for my walks. So that was a really good book. I really enjoyed that. I recommend it.
Who narrated it?
It was, I can't remember. I can find it for you.
But it wasn't Stephen King.
It wasn't Stephen King. Although what was weird though, Stephen King did read the opening bit, which was weird. Oh, it was narrated by Ron McClarty, McLarty, Ron McClarty. It's a really good book. And then I read or listened to The Exorcist, and it was written by William Peter Blatty, but this also is narrated by William Peter Blatty, and he did do a great job of narrating it. It was creepy, and I haven't read The Exorcist, so I listened to the audiobook, absolutely loved it. So last week I was thinking, I wonder if there's anything good on YouTube about the making of it. So I look it up on YouTube, and there's a documentary called The Fear of God, The Making of The Exorcist. and it's really, really interesting. And there's loads of footage because they shot quite a bit of behind the scenes footage, and there's footage of Dick Smith
I
doing the
have to
makeup
watch that because
and
that's still the
everything.
scariest movie I've ever seen.
It's
It's my
it's
favorite.
terrifying.
It's my favorite.
Well, I think the movie is good, but I think the book does a better job, obviously, of telling the story because it was a book. But it feels like the movie kind of was a bit hasty. You know, it kind of jumps quite harshly
Sure.
from thing to thing to thing. But I think reading the book and then watching the movie is a good combination because you know the story better, and then you can enjoy the kind of visuals of it, especially that bit when she comes down the stairs backwards like a crab. That is
My
fucked up.
God, yeah, that I watched. I made the mistake of watching that at home by myself. When Donna was she was gigging somewhere with her
Yeah,
band,
and you
and I saw that, I went, fuck me. I went around, I turned every light in the house on.
you are hiding behind a Bible,
Oh
clutching
my
a
God.
baseball bat.
I wasn't expecting that. Have you
Yeah,
have you seen Cujo, or have you read Cujo?
No, was it you telling me about it? That it's from the point of view of the dog
Yeah,
at
the
times.
book is amazing because
Okay, maybe that will be my next one.
inside the head of the dog as he's going
Oh.
mad from rabies, and it's so creepy and so cool. It's really
Okay.
well written.
Well, I will
It's
listen
one of
to
my
that then.
favorite Stephen King books. The movie was okay, but the book is outrageous.
So one thing that is obviously different for everyone is depending on where you listen. One of the places you can listen to this is on YouTube, and what's nice about YouTube is that you can leave comments. And someone's got in touch. Darren Hartley got in touch and said, "Hi Stuart, Lars Carlson, such a great artist, and he's Swedish from my favorite place, Gothenburg. Thanks for this podcast. P.S. Do people still use Fixodent when you have defects in your alginate to save an oil clay cleanup when casting? David Jones told me about this when I went to visit him. That's not something I'd done. So I said to him, no, I've not heard of that trick. That sounds really good. But have you heard of that?
Yeah, but it completely left my brain. I've used it before to help stick the alginate to the plaster shell. You know, sometimes you get edges that'll kind of lean in and
Flop in, yeah.
You can use the Fixodent to help hold it together. You know, you can also super glue it.
Mm-hmm. I've used super glue before.
To patch tears in the alginate with Fixodent. That's a great idea.
Right. Yeah. I guess because it works well because it responds well to moisture because it's used in the mouth. It's safe to get on the skin if you happen to do that. And it's very, very gummy. I know from vampire fangs I've worn in the past, which I helped use Fixodent to place. That was horrible. But it's interesting because I think it's probably much cheaper than super glue, but also it fills gaps. So you end up with, so when the alginate shrinks a touch, you know, you can take up that gap. You don't, like with super glue, you have to have the alginate sticking to the plaster. Right. So if it's shrunk, you're stretching it out and stressing the glue. Whereas Fixodent would actually fill that gap and it would hold it in place through suction. So even though that's not what he's talking about, he's talking about actually filling the holes with it. That's interesting that you mentioned that because that feels to me like a more something I would do more often because I don't tend to cast limbs that often. Certainly not with alginate. Big limbs and stuff I tend to do in silicone, except hands. I do like to do hands. Depends what it is. But hands and feet I would probably do in silicone. In alginate, sorry. But like entire arms, legs, bodies, whatever. I tend to do those in silicone, which you tend to have more time with, so you don't end up with air bubbles in quite the same way. I think that's the thing with
alginate can be tricky. I mean, there's a learning curve to getting good at it because I think there are maybe one or two alginates that are out there now that will stick together once alginate's cured. But it used to be that you had to mix it all at once because fresh alginate won't stick to cured alginate.
I think that wraps that up for this episode. I'll just once again urge you to get in touch. We like to hear from you. We like questions. We love questions. I had a couple of emails about, I get a fair few like college people and they want to do surveys and things, which is good. But we'd love it if you had questions that you want to hear on here because that is something that we can build an episode around. So by all means, don't feel like you can't.
You can message us on our Instagram page, Battles with Bits of Rubber. You can email us at stuartandtodd@gmail.com. You can find our Facebook page.
And you can leave a voice message as well.
Leave us a voice message, yes, on our website.
And I will put the links to that all in the show notes. In case anyone wondering what I mean by show notes, is if you're listening to this on the actual website, that's fine. You'll find us on, if you're listening to this, there's a good chance you've already figured out how to listen to this. But it's surprising how many people say, where can I find it? And it's like, well, it's on Spotify, it's on Apple Podcasts, it's on wherever you find podcasts generally. But you can also download it, or you can stream it.
It's everywhere.
Everywhere. So have a dig around. But yeah, on the website, which is battleswithbitsofrubber.com, you'll find obviously each episode that we upload is on there with extensive show notes, because that way we put links in and things like that. But
pictures
and words. But you can also leave a voice message directly on there from the website. And if you're using your phone, obviously use your microphone with the phone, and you can just leave us a voice message, and those are quite fun. So do some of that. But I think that's it. If you like this, please subscribe. Or if you have subscribed already, just tell one more person. If everyone that listens to this tells one more person, that doubles our listenership. That'd be amazing. We'd love it too. If you could help us grow, that would be doing us a solid.
And it will result in world peace.
Would it make COVID go away?
I hope so. I'm ready for that shit to be gone.
Yes, it's getting a bit much now. There's some interesting stuff in Prosthetics magazine about all the different artists, well, not all of the artists, but a range of artists, and how they have responded to the sudden amount of time that they've gotten. Yeah. Everyone's kind of keeping busy and doing stuff.
Well, Aaron Mikash actually has a Stan Winston class. I just saw a post about that this morning on the Stan Winston
cool
Instagram page, that she's got a class on how to deal with all of this COVID stuff. That I think I am going to go download that as soon as we finish.
Beautiful. All right, mate. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Talk to you soon.
Yes, sir. Take care of yourself. Bye-bye, man.
Bye.
You can get in touch through our Facebook page or email us at stuartandtodd@gmail.com. Check the show notes for more information. If you enjoyed this episode, tell someone else and help us grow by sharing it on social media. Thanks for listening.